Okay, so it is Sunday, the 22nd of April. Looks like my camera shut off without my knowledge, and so it would have only recorded for a few minutes. I guess I'll have to be a bit more conscientious about making sure it's running properly. It got through the first half hour of my protest quite well, but I just restarted it a few minutes ago and just noticed that it had stopped recording. Seems to be okay for now. But yeah, the camera's been a little bit buggy of late. It's been physically damaged a few times. In fact, Stéphane Giroux, CTV news reporter, actually grabbed my camera and twisted the lens a little over a month ago. That did some damage for sure. May have affected its consistency in recording. So anyhow, we'll just have to keep a closer eye on the camera to see if it's actually recording, especially if something of some interest happens. So far, so good. So anyhow, where was I? Oh yeah, we were going to talk about one or two of the picket sign slogans, and I thought I would talk about this one, Church of the Image Tarnishing Ministers. It originally was singular and referred only to Reverend Ray Drennan and his image tarnishing of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, to say nothing of the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community via his intolerance and bigotry, which was either expressed privately or indeed publicly, and certainly resulted in my protest outside the church. You know, the church accused me of tarnishing the image of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. Well, if they had dealt responsibly with Reverend Ray Drennan's anti-religious intolerance and bigotry, my protest never would have even begun. It's only as a result of the Unitarian Church of Montreal's incredibly stubborn refusal to hold Reverend Ray Drennan responsible for his anti-religious intolerance and bigotry against me and indeed other people that my protest began. And this particular picket sign, it's actually dating back now to the fall of 2000. This picket sign was originally inspired by the fact that on October 9th of 2000, Reverend Ray Drennan published a very opinionated opinion editorial in the Gazette. Or perhaps I should say the Gazette published a very opinionated, to say the least, opinion editorial of Reverend Ray Drennan. And in this opinion piece, which was most ironically titled Wrong Message. Hello. I'm always wonderful when I stand accused of blasphemy by Unitarians in the 21st century. It's a huge honor and privilege to be accused of blasphemy by atheists. So, anyhow, so getting back to things, getting back to Reverend Ray Drennan. Actually, this is kind of ironic because, you know, I'm accused of blasphemous libel by Unitarian Universalists for speaking out about Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse, and more specifically, such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. Whereas Reverend Ray Drennan himself actually wrote material that actually is closer to fitting what Canada's anti-blasphemy law is intended to address. So on October 9th of 2000, the Gazette published Reverend Ray Drennan's Wrong Message, which essentially was an attack on the fact that former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau's state funeral was a Roman Catholic religious service. According to Reverend Ray Drennan's basically atheistic, anti-religious intolerance and bigotry, Pierre Elliott Trudeau's state funeral should not have been a religious service. It should have been some kind of secular affair with no religious content. That's essentially what his argument was. And well, he has a right to make that argument. The thing is he made that argument in quite an offensive manner that was very insulting to, not just Roman Catholics, but pretty well every religious person. He spoke about how it was a sham state funeral. He spoke about how it was a meaningless ritual, and he broadened it out. He was basically suggesting that all religious rituals are meaningless, like not just the state funeral of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, but pretty much every religious ritual was a meaningless ritual, according to Reverend Ray Drennan's wrong message. So he definitely publicly tarnished the image of not just the Unitarian Church of Montreal, but also the Unitarian Universalist religious community with that wrong message. And I decided to write a letter to the editor pointing out how Reverend Ray Drennan's wrong message was indeed wrong in more ways than one, and how it was, intolerant and actually went against Unitarian Universalist principles and so on. And so I wrote a letter, a fairly lengthy one, about a page and a half, 2 pages. I didn't expect the whole thing to get published, but I thought they'd edit it down to, what they wanted to publish if they were going to publish it. And a few days went by and I didn't hear from the Gazette, so I decided to call up the Gazette to see if they were going to publish my letter. And I got the letters editor for the Gazette, who said, Mr. Edgar, you have competition. I said, oh really? How much competition? He said, we've received the ballpark figure of 50 letters to the editor, all of them condemning Reverend Ray Drennan's editorial, not one of them in favor of it. So that was indeed a lot of competition on the letters to the editor front. Literally 50 or so letters to the editor, every single one of them condemning Reverend Ray Drennan's intolerance and bigotry, which obviously would not reflect very well on the Unitarian Church of Montreal and the larger Unitarian religious community if and when they're published. Well, as it happens, the Gazette did not publish my letter, but they published 5 representative examples of the 50 or so letters to the editor. So they published 10% of the letters to the editor sometime later in the month. And I can assure you that neither Reverend Ray Drennan, nor the Unitarian Church of Montreal, nor the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community came out of it looking very good. So originally this picket sign was directly addressing that, and of course other image tarnishing behavior on the part of Reverend Ray Drennan, such as the bad press the Unitarian Church of Montreal got as a result of Reverend Ray Drennan's anti-religious intolerance and bigotry towards me. So over the years, however, I decided to broaden it out a bit because, Reverend Ray Drennan is by no means the only image tarnishing minister amongst Unitarian Universalist ministers. In other words, other Unitarian Universalist ministers tarnish the image of their own individual churches or the larger Unitarian Universalist religious community. And so I just broadened it out. But I also broadened it out locally because, as far as I'm concerned, Reverend Diane Olenek Rollert has now helped to tarnish the image of the Unitarian Church of Montreal in various ways. So just on the local level, there's at least 2 Unitarian Universalist ministers who have helped to tarnish the image of Unitarian Universalism in Montreal and indeed the rest of the world. So, just continue to circulate here, and it's a nice sunny day, a little on the cool side, but not cold. It's cool. It's you want to have a sweater on and a jacket. You might want to have a toque on, or a baseball cap at least, and I do have a toque on because I don't want to get a spring cold. I actually got through the whole winter without a cold worth speaking of, let alone the flu, so I did quite nicely this winter. So, just dressing a little conservatively to ensure that, or at least not ensure, but at least try to prevent getting a cold, as a result of the change in the weather. Alrighty, so again, we'll continue to circulate here, and again, the month of April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, and so the theme of my protest, there's always an element of that, because part of what I'm protesting against is sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers, and the cover-up and denial of sexual abuse of children by the Unitarian Universalist Association and various other individual Unitarian Universalists. So that's, it's always an element of my protest, whether it's Child Abuse Prevention Month or not. But because it is Child Abuse Prevention Month, I have been putting a slightly extra emphasis on the child abuse aspect. And today, the chalk slogans I laid down are just very general, just 4 words, and they say Unitarian child abuse sucks. And I left, child sex abuse. I left the sex out. I'm talking about all forms of child abuse, so psychological abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, beating a child or otherwise physically harming a child. Not all child abuse is sex abuse. So I'm noticing that my battery is suddenly showing that it's about to die. It was showing that it was at 40% power not so long ago, so I thought it'd be okay, but now it's showing it's about to die. So we're probably going to wrap up a segment of video very soon and put in a fresh battery so I can continue to record the monologue, amongst other things. I basically have to have a camera running almost constantly to protect myself from false claims by Montreal Unitarians who are trying to shut down my protest, to record any bad behavior on the part of Unitarians. I've been physically assaulted on a few occasions. I've had my picket sign stolen and vandalized. Actually, just last month, on the 18th of March. Good morning. It's always a good morning when I'm accused of blasphemy. Huge honor and privilege to be accused of blasphemy by atheist Unitarians. It's a real feather in my cap. So another person attending the Unitarian Church of Montreal saying good morning, and indeed it is a good morning when I'm accused of blasphemy. What a joke. Oh, and speaking of jokes and laughing, let's have a look at the wayside pulpit here. So this is the wayside pulpit, which I sometimes like to jokingly refer to as the wayward pulpit, because often what's written here contradicts the actual behavior of Unitarians, Montreal Unitarians and otherwise. Laughter is the shortest distance between two people. And indeed it is. Indeed it is. In more ways than one. I won't comment further, but yeah, there's definitely some truly laughable aspects of what Unitarian Universalists say and do that totally contradict their claimed principles and purposes and other ideals, and so on. And it's looking like now is a good time to change the battery, since there's not a whole lot of people approaching the church. Doesn't look like anything's likely to happen in the next minute or two. So I'm going to wrap this segment up, put in a fresh battery, and start up the recording again. So en français, le rire est la distance la plus courte entre deux personnes. Et effectivement, c'est vrai. Et ça peut être interprété dans au moins deux façons. Et je vais laisser ça à vous. Mais pensez comment le rire peut minimiser la distance entre deux personnes. Ça peut être dans un sens positif, mais ça peut être dans un sens assez négatif aussi. Quand vous okay, my French is falling apart. Mais voilà, when you laugh in someone's face, and when you laugh at someone, it can often result in them getting in your face. So that's the negative side of laughter being the shortest distance between two people. This is obviously meant to be interpreted positively, but there's a negative interpretation as well. And on that note, we're ending this segment of recording and putting in a fresh battery and continuing on for another half hour or so.